The old diesel generator arrived at Mercy County Hospital 37 minutes before the first child stopped breathing. Rain hammered the emergency room windows hard enough to shake the glass. Water dripped from ceiling tiles into yellow mop buckets. Half the town had already gone dark after the storm tore through Jackson County, Mississippi, ripping power lines out of the ground like roots from wet soil. Inside the pediatric wing, a nurse named Lorraine kept looking at the red emergency lights flickering above the hallway. Every flicker lasted a little longer. Every flicker made her stomach tighten. Because the backup generator outside had already failed once, and the second backup wasn't coming. Not tonight. Not in this storm. You need to prepare for manual ventilation. The doctor said it quietly, but everyone in the room heard him. Respiratory therapist lowered her eyes. One of the mothers started crying into her hands. Outside, thunder rolled across the flat Mississippi fields like freight trains colliding somewhere in the dark. Then someone heard it. Not thunder, not rain, an engine. Far away at first, heavy, slow, mechanical, like metal breathing through old lungs. Chunk, chunk. The sound grew louder as headlights pushed through the rain near the ambulance entrance. Nurses moved toward the windows. A security guard stepped outside beneath the awning and stared into the storm with disbelief spreading across his face. Because pulling into the flooded parking lot was not a modern emergency truck. It was a faded green flatbed hauling a machine that looked older than the hospital itself. Rust-stained steel. Massive flywheel. Hand-painted gauges. Thick exhaust stack coughing black smoke into the rain. And standing beside it in a soaked brown work jacket was a black man nobody inside that hospital had taken seriously for almost 15 years. Elijah Brooks. The maintenance supervisor whispered first. That thing can't possibly work. But the engine kept coming. Chunk, chunk, chunk. Like it had something to prove. 3 hours earlier, Elijah Brooks had been lying on his back beneath the generator housing inside his garage when the lights failed across half the county. The outage hit so suddenly the fluorescent tubes overhead blinked once and died mid-flicker, leaving only the storm light creeping through the dirty windows. For a few seconds he stayed still on the concrete floor, one arm under the engine block, listening. Rain, wind, then silence. No refrigerators humming from neighboring houses. No distant highway buzz. No grain dryers, no streetlights. County-wide outage. Elijah slid himself out from under the machine and stood slowly, wiping grease across his jaw without noticing. The garage smelled like diesel fuel, old metal, and rainwater creeping under the side door. A battered radio sat near the welding table beside a cold cup of coffee he'd forgotten to drink hours earlier. He clicked the radio on. Static, then panic. Memorial grid failure affecting Mercy County Hospital. Backup instability reported. Elijah froze. The voice continued beneath bursts of static. Portable units delayed due to bridge flooding near Route 14. He looked toward the generator. The Detroit Diesel 6-71 engine sat open beneath hanging shop lights, like the skeleton of some industrial animal. He'd spent 11 months rebuilding it. 11 months that most people in town considered embarrassing. The machine came from the liquidation yard behind Whitfield Ag Systems after one of Marcus Whitfield's partner companies collapsed during a contract dispute. Everybody else saw scrap metal. Elijah saw clean injector housings beneath the rust. Factory machined bolts that had been replaced too recently. Compression numbers scratched by hand into the housing with a metal scribe. Somebody had loved that machine once. That mattered to him. The problem was Elijah Brooks had a reputation in Jackson County. Not the kind that gets you invited places. The kind people lower their voices about. Because 6 years earlier, after his father's death, Elijah inherited Brooks' repair garage along with $38,000 in debt, unpaid taxes, and a building the bank expected him to lose within months. Most people thought he would. Some secretly we hoped he would. A black-owned repair shop surviving in rural Mississippi wasn't impossible in 1998. It just wasn't welcomed by everybody. Especially not by men like Marcus Whitfield. Marcus owned the largest agricultural equipment dealership in 3 counties. Tall, polished, permanently clean. The kind of man who shook hands while looking past your shoulder. He sold modern combines, GPS systems, computerized irrigation controls, 6-figure financing packages. And he hated old machinery. Not because it offended him mechanically, because old machines kept people from needing him. 2 years earlier, Elijah had repaired a cotton picker that Whitfield's dealership declared economically dead. After that, farmers started quietly bringing broken equipment to Brooks' garage, instead of financing replacements through Marcus. Not enough to threaten Whitfield, but enough to irritate him. Especially because Elijah rarely advertised. People just talked. About the quiet mechanic who fixed impossible things. About the man who welded cracked engine heads nobody else would touch. About the old diesel irrigation pump he'd rebuilt using salvaged military parts from Alabama. About the generator. That strange old generator. Elijah walked toward it now through the dark garage while rain hammered the roof. His father's gloves still hung beside the workbench. Brown leather. Cracked at the fingertips. He looked at them for a long second, then at the engine, then back at the radio. Hospital officials requesting emergency mechanical support. Mechanical support. Not electronic. That mattered. Modern hospital backup systems relied heavily on electronic control modules. Storm surges killed electronics faster than engines. Water intrusion made it worse. But the Detroit 671 was different. Pure mechanical diesel. No onboard computer. No digital governor. No electronic ignition. If fuel reached the cylinders and air reached the intake, it would run. Elijah grabbed his flashlight, then he stopped. Because he realized something cold. The generator had never been tested under full electrical load, not once. He'd rebuilt the engine, rebuilt the injectors, rebuilt the fuel pump, rewired the alternator assembly, but he'd never connected it to a live facility. If he hauled it to Mercy County Hospital and it failed, people could die. Rainwater tapped against the windows in uneven bursts. The radio crackled again. NICU power instability. Elijah closed his eyes. He remembered another hospital room, another storm. His father lying beneath white fluorescent lights after the hydraulic press accident at Miller Industrial. The backup systems failed twice that night too. Not catastrophic failures, just enough. Enough to delay surgery. Enough to change outcomes. Enough to leave Elijah standing beside a bed 3 days later, staring at a folded blanket nobody would ever use again. The memory passed through him quietly, like cold water. He opened his eyes, then reached for the toolbox. 40 minutes later, Elijah's flatbed rolled through the storm toward Mercy County Hospital with the old generator chained behind it. The windshield wipers barely kept up. Rain blurred the road into liquid gray. Twice he nearly turned around. Not because he doubted the machine, because he doubted himself. That felt worse. At the hospital entrance, ambulances sat crooked beneath the flooding rain, while exhausted nurses carried battery-powered monitors between departments. And standing beneath the emergency awning in a dry black raincoat was Marcus Whitfield. Of course he was there. Marcus sat on the hospital board. He spotted the flatbed immediately. His expression hardened, then changed to disbelief, then irritation. Elijah stepped out into ankle-deep water. The generator kept idling behind him with a low metallic rumble. Marcus walked forward slowly. What is this? Elijah grabbed chains from the trailer. Backup generation. Marcus looked at the machine like it carried disease. That thing belongs in a scrapyard. It runs. You don't know if it runs under load. Elijah didn't answer. Because Marcus was right, that silence seemed to encourage him. Inside the entrance, nurses and patients watched through the glass. Marcus lowered his voice. You bring a failed homemade setup into a hospital during an emergency and somebody gets hurt. He shook his head. You understand the liability? Another flicker hit the building. This time the hallway lights died completely for almost 4 full seconds. Somewhere inside the hospital, a child started crying. Nobody moved. Rain drummed against the metal awning overhead. Marcus folded his arms. We already have a replacement unit coming from Baton Rouge. Elijah looked toward the dark highway disappearing into the storm. Bridge on Route 14 collapsed 20 minutes ago. Marcus blinked. How do you know that? I drove past it. For the first time that night, Marcus Whitfield looked uncertain. Not defeated, not humbled. Just suddenly aware that the world outside his office walls might be changing faster than his plans. Another doctor burst through the entrance doors. We're losing refrigeration in pediatric storage. Marcus turned immediately. We have a unit coming. When? Nobody answered. The doctor looked at Elijah, then at the machine, then back at Marcus. Can it produce stable 3-phase output? Elijah nodded once. If the alternator holds. If? Elijah looked directly at him. It's 34 years old. Nobody spoke. The generator idled in the rain behind them, coughing smoke into the dark Mississippi sky. Then the pediatric hallway lights flickered again, and stayed dim. The doctor made the decision. Hook it up. Marcus Whitfield stared at him. You can be serious. The doctor looked exhausted. I'm completely serious. Elijah climbed onto the trailer without another word. And for the first time that night, Marcus Whitfield stepped aside. The first thing everybody noticed was the smell. Hot diesel. Burned oil. Rain hitting overheated steel. It rolled through the hospital loading entrance before the electricity did. Elijah knelt beside the transfer switch panel, with rainwater dripping from his sleeves, while 2 hospital maintenance workers stood behind him, trying very hard not to look nervous. One of them finally spoke. You done hospital systems before? Elijah tightened a terminal connection without looking up. No. That answer did not help. Behind them, the hallway lights flickered again, then dimmed so low the corridor looked underwater. Somewhere deeper inside the building, an alarm started beeping in slow, uneven intervals. A nurse hurried past carrying blankets against her chest. Marcus Whitfield watched the entire scene from beneath the awning, with his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. You don't even know the load requirements, he snapped. Elijah stood slowly and wiped rainwater off the side of the panel. How many refrigeration compressors? The maintenance supervisor blinked. What? How many refrigeration compressors are active in pediatric? 3. Any MRI systems online? No. Central air? Partial. Good. Marcus frowned. Elijah looked toward the old generator outside. Then we don't power the whole building. The doctor from earlier stepped closer. What can you handle? Elijah thought for 2 seconds. Emergency wing, NICU refrigeration, ventilation support. Hallway lighting. That's it. You can't do surgical. Not safely. The honesty caught everyone off guard. Most people trying to impress a room would have exaggerated. Elijah did the opposite, because overloaded generators don't fail slowly. They fail all at once. And when old diesel generators fail under unstable load, the voltage spikes can destroy equipment connected to them, including ventilators. Marcus folded his arms tighter. So your solution is half a hospital. My solution is keeping part of it alive. Silence settled over the loading dock except for the generator rumbling outside. Chunk, 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 steady. The doctor nodded first. Do it. Marcus stepped toward him immediately. You are making a terrible decision. The doctor looked exhausted beyond anger. No, he said quietly. The storm made a terrible decision. Then he walked away. Elijah glanced once toward Marcus. Not triumphantly, not smug, just tired. That somehow made Marcus angrier. The next 20 minutes turned into controlled chaos. Extension lines snaked through flooded hallways. Nurses moved equipment room by room beneath emergency flashlights. Maintenance workers dragged portable junction boxes through standing water, while Elijah directed everything with the calm precision of somebody who had spent most of his life fixing problems nobody else wanted. People began noticing things, small things. He never raised his voice, never repeated instructions, never rushed movements. When one connector sparked near the loading dock, Elijah shut the system down before anybody else even saw the problem. Ground fault, he muttered. Then he replaced the connector himself using parts from his own truck toolbox. Marcus noticed that too. And he hated that he noticed it. Because competence changes a room. People start listening differently, even before they realize it. By midnight, the generator finally carried its first major load. The old Detroit engine deepened in tone immediately. The flywheels slowed slightly, then stabilized. Inside the hospital, emergency corridor lights brightened one section at a time. A nurse near pediatric refrigeration actually clapped. Someone else started crying quietly against a wall. The maintenance supervisor stared at the voltage meter. Sweet Jesus. The needle barely moved. Stable output. Marcus walked toward the trailer slowly, staring at the machine like it had personally insulted him. It shouldn't be able to hold that load. Elijah checked the oil pressure gauge. It's not. Marcus frowned. What? It's handling about 60%. We still need load rotation every 40 minutes or it'll overheat. The maintenance supervisor looked alarmed again. You didn't mention overheating. Everything overheats eventually. Again, honesty. Again, no performance. That bothered Marcus more than confidence would have, because confidence he understood. Marketing he understood. This quiet certainty without ego felt different. More dangerous somehow. At 1:17 a.m., the first real problem hit. A loud metallic crack echoed from inside the generator housing. The engine coughed once, then the lights inside pediatric dimmed sharply. Several nurses gasped. Elijah shut the fuel lever halfway instantly. The generator stabilized again but barely. Marcus pointed immediately. There, that's exactly what I warned them about. Elijah ignored him and grabbed a flashlight. When he opened the side panel, heat rolled out hard enough to fog his glasses. One of the mounting brackets had fractured from vibration stress. Not catastrophic, yet. But if the alternator shifted alignment under load, the driveshaft could seize. And then everything would go dark. The maintenance supervisor swallowed hard. Can you fix it? Elijah stared at the cracked steel. Rainwater dripped off the edge of the trailer beside him. Then he looked toward the hospital loading bay. Metal shelves, laundry carts, wheelchairs, old equipment. Improvisation. He climbed down from the trailer. Find me a steel caster bracket. What? Off a hospital laundry cart. The supervisor blinked twice, then ran. Marcus actually laughed. Not loudly, just once. In disbelief. You are holding a hospital together with junk parts. Elijah finally looked directly at him. No, he said quietly. I'm holding it together with steel. 10 minutes later, Elijah welded the replacement brace directly onto the generator housing beneath pouring rain, while 2 nurses held flashlights for him under umbrellas. The sparks lit their faces orange against the dark storm. One nurse asked softly, "Where'd you learn to weld like that?" Elijah didn't stop working. "My father repaired river barges." "Where?" "Vicksburg." She nodded like that explained everything. Maybe it did. At 2:03 a.m., the repaired briquette held. At 2:41 the refrigeration stabilized. At 3:12, one of the children in respiratory distress finally started breathing, normally enough for the staff to remove manual ventilation support. The respiratory therapist sat down in the hallway afterward and cried into both hands from exhaustion. Nobody filmed any of it, nobody gave speeches. Nobody suddenly became inspirational. People were simply tired and trying to survive the night. Around 4 a.m., Marcus Whitfield stood alone beneath the awning watching rainwater run across the parking lot. The storm had weakened slightly. The generator still ran. Chunk, 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 relentless. Elijah sat on an overturned milk crate beside the trailer, drinking cold coffee from a paper cup somebody handed him an hour earlier. Grease covered his hands up to the wrists. His welding sleeve had burned through near the elbow. He looked exhausted enough to fall asleep sitting upright. Marcus walked toward him slowly. For a while, neither man spoke. Then Marcus said something unexpected. "My father hated old machinery too." Elijah glanced at him. Marcus kept watching the rain. "He grew up poor. Said broken equipment was humiliation." He paused. "When I built Whitfield Ag, I promised myself I'd never depend on patched up things again." Elijah took another sip of cold coffee. "You still do?" Marcus frowned. "What?" Elijah nodded toward the hospital. "Everybody does." That landed harder than Marcus expected, because deep down he knew it was true. Hospitals patched equipment, farmers patched seasons, families patched debt, workers patched marriages, mechanics patched engines. Nobody survived life without repairs. The realization sat there between them while rain tapped against the trailer roof. Then suddenly the generator sound changed. Subtle, but wrong. Elijah stood immediately. The rhythm had shifted. Not failing, hunting. Uneven fuel delivery. He moved toward the engine fast now, setting the coffee down untouched. Marcus followed without realizing it. Elijah opened the injector access panel. Listened. Touched the fuel rail. Then his expression changed. Not recognition. Which was somehow worse. Marcus saw it instantly. "What is it?" Elijah didn't answer right away. Instead he reached inside the housing and touched a small brass plate near the injector assembly. His face went still, completely still. Rain hissed softly against the hot engine. Marcus stepped closer. "What?" Elijah finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "This generator." He wiped grease across the brass plate with his thumb. And beneath 40 years of oil and dirt, a name slowly appeared in faded engraved letters. Calvin Brooks. His father's name. For a moment Elijah forgot about the storm. Forgot about the hospital. Forgot about Marcus Whitfield standing beside him in the rain. All he could see was the brass plate beneath his fingertips. Calvin Brooks stamped crookedly into the metal with uneven hand punches. Not factory work, personal work. His father had done that. Elijah knew because Calvin Brooks marked everything he rebuilt the same way. Quietly. Never visible from the outside. Sometimes under housings. Sometimes inside valve covers. Tiny hidden signatures nobody was supposed to notice unless they took the machine apart themselves. As a kid, Elijah used to hunt for them. Like treasure. The generator rumbled harder beneath his hand. Chunk. Chunk, chunk, still alive. Marcus leaned closer. "That's your father?" Elijah nodded once. Rainwater rolled down the back of his neck beneath his collar. Marcus stared at the brass plate again. "I thought your father worked river transport." "He did." "Then why was he rebuilding industrial generators?" Elijah looked at the engine. "Because black mechanics in Mississippi in the 70s fixed whatever people would pay them to fix." The sentence landed without anger. That somehow made it heavier. Inside the hospital, the lights flickered once more. The injector rhythm stumbled again. Elijah snapped back into motion immediately. He grabbed a wrench from the trailer toolbox and loosened the injector line carefully while listening to the engine. Fuel sputtered unevenly. Air intrusion. Somewhere in the old system, rainwater contamination or vibration had loosened part of the fuel feed. Not catastrophic yet, but getting there. The maintenance supervisor appeared beside the trailer looking pale. "We just lost pressure alarms in neonatal." Elijah didn't look up. "Valerie or oxygen?" "Oxygen backup." Elijah's eyes narrowed slightly. That changed things. Modern hospitals used electrically monitored oxygen systems. If backup power fluctuated too hard, safety regulators sometimes locked pressure, routing automatically to prevent contamination or fire risk. Too much instability and entire sections shut themselves down. The irony would have been funny if children weren't attached to those systems. Marcus finally spoke again. "What do you need?" Elijah paused. It was the first useful question Marcus Whitfield had asked all night. "Flashlight." Marcus blinked once, then grabbed one from a nurse nearby and handed it over without another word. Small thing, but people noticed, especially the maintenance workers. Especially Marcus himself, because pride changes shape slowly, not dramatically, quietly, like metal bending under pressure. Elijah traced the fuel line toward the secondary filter housing. Then he stopped. Something was wrong. Not mechanical, human. The filter cap bolts had tool forks too fresh for a 40-year-old generator. Recent marks. Maybe within 10 years. Maybe less. He frowned. His father died 6 years earlier. So who had serviced this machine after Calvin Brooks? The realization slid into him slowly. Somebody else had kept this generator alive after his father was gone. And suddenly the machine felt less abandoned, less forgotten. Another metallic stumble shook the housing. The engine coughed hard enough to dim the hallway lights again. A nurse near the loading doors whispered, "Please don't die." Nobody knew whether she meant the machine or the children upstairs. Elijah removed the fuel cap assembly carefully. Water. Tiny beads floating beneath diesel. Condensation contamination from years in storage mixed with storm vibration. Enough to choke fuel delivery intermittently. He looked around quickly. "You got rubbing alcohol?" The maintenance supervisor stared. "What? 91% isopropyl. Why?" "It absorbs water." Marcus frowned again. "Alcohol inside a diesel system?" Elijah nodded while already reaching for tools. Small amounts bind moisture long enough to pass through combustion safely. He tightened another fitting. "Truckers do it in winter sometimes." The maintenance supervisor ran toward storage. Marcus stared at Elijah differently now. Not respectfully yet, but carefully. Like a man realizing he might have misunderstood something important for a very long time. Rain hammered the roof harder again. The storm wasn't moving away, it was circling. At 4:47 a.m., one of the nurses brought Elijah a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in plastic. He set it beside the toolbox untouched. At 5:03 the alcohol treatment stabilized the injector rhythm. At 5:11 pediatric refrigeration normalized fully. At 5:26 the county emergency dispatcher arrived with bad news. The Baton Rouge emergency generator convoy wasn't coming. Flooding had taken out 2 highways. Mercy County Hospital was on its own until morning. Nobody said anything for several seconds. The exhaustion in the room deepened into something heavier, reality. Because surviving a few hours felt different from surviving until daylight. The dispatcher rubbed water from his forehead. "Power company says maybe noon." A nurse actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because she was too tired to react correctly anymore. Marcus looked toward the old generator, then toward Elijah. Then back toward the hospital. He lowered his voice. "Can it hold until noon?" Elijah answered honestly. "I don't know." That answer frightened people. But it also kept them trusting him. Because every single person in that loading bay understood something now. He wasn't pretending. At 6:02 a.m., the rain finally weakened enough for gray morning light to appear behind the clouds. The parking lot looked like a shallow lake. Inside the hospital, exhausted staff rotated shifts on caffeine and adrenaline. Somebody started handing out vending machine crackers from a cardboard box. Wet footprints covered the hallways. The old generator kept running. Chunk. 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 Steady again. A small crowd had formed near the loading dock now. Nurses, patients' families, maintenance staff, county deputies. They watched the machine the way people watch a campfire during winter. Like something ancient keeping darkness back. One little boy wrapped in a hospital blanket wandered near the trailer, holding an IV pole beside his mother. He stared at the flywheel spinning slowly behind the steel mesh guard. "What's that thing?" Elijah wiped grease from his hands with an old red rag. "Generator." The boy nodded seriously. "It sounds angry." A few nearby nurses laughed softly for the first time all night. Elijah looked at the machine, then surprised himself by smiling slightly. "No," he said. "It just sounds old." The boy thought about that, then pointed at the brass plate. "Who's Calvin?" Elijah looked down at the faded name again. Rainwater dripped from the trailer edge beside his boots. For a second he almost answered normally. "My father." Simple, easy. But something stopped him. Because standing there beside that engine, hearing it breathe life into an entire hospital while children slept upstairs under powered ventilators, it suddenly felt bigger than family. Bigger than memory. Calvin Brooks had rebuilt this machine decades ago, without ever knowing what it would one day do. Without knowing his son would stand beside it in a storm trying to save strangers. Without knowing the machine itself would outlive him. Elijah finally answered quietly. He was a mechanic. The boy nodded like that, explained everything important. Maybe it did. Then suddenly the emergency room doors burst open. A paramedic rushed into the loading bay soaked to the skin. We got a problem. Everybody turned instantly. County nursing home lost backup power completely. The room went silent. The paramedic pointed toward the generator. They're asking if this thing can handle another facility. Marcus answered before Elijah could. Too fast, too sharp, fear disguised as logic. The paramedic looked desperate. We got 23 elderly residents on oxygen support. Elijah stared at the machine, then at the fuel gauges, then at the morning sky beginning to brighten over flooded Mississippi roads. He knew exactly what Marcus was thinking. If they overloaded the system now, Mercy County Hospital could lose everything too. 2 facilities dead instead of 1. Marcus stepped closer. You split output and this whole thing collapses. Maybe he was right. That was the worst part. Elijah looked back toward the generator. The old Detroit engine rattled steadily beneath the rain-stained housing. Then his eyes stopped on something near the rear maintenance panel. A second faded marking, almost invisible beneath rust. Not his father's handwriting. Different. Cleaner. 3 words scratched into old green paint. Load before speed. Elijah stared at the words scratched into the paint. Load before speed. Not a slogan, a reminder. The kind mechanics leave each other when they know machines will outlive them. The paramedic stepped closer, soaked rainwater dripping from his sleeves. So? Marcus answered again. No. This time Elijah turned toward him fully. Marcus pointed toward the generator. You split the electrical load and frequency stability drops. If this engine stalls under transfer, he gestured toward the hospital behind them. You lose refrigeration, oxygen monitoring, ventilation support all at once. The maintenance supervisor swallowed hard, because Marcus wasn't wrong. Modern emergency systems needed stable frequency almost as much as voltage. Too much fluctuation and sensitive medical equipment shut down automatically to protect itself. The old diesel could physically generate enough electricity. That wasn't the problem. The problem was transition spikes, load balancing, distribution timing. Things old mechanical systems handled badly under sudden demand swings. Elijah looked back toward the flywheel. Chunk, 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 steady. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. He suddenly remembered something his father used to say while repairing marine generators down in Vicksburg shipyards. Big engines don't like panic. As a kid, Elijah never understood that sentence. Now he did. Modern systems reacted instantly. Mechanical systems needed rhythm, gradual load, not sudden demand spikes. The paramedic spoke again. We don't need the whole nursing home. Just oxygen concentrators and hallway lighting. Elijah looked at him sharply. How many residents need powered oxygen? 7. Portable tanks? Almost empty. Marcus rubbed water off his forehead. This is insane. But Elijah wasn't listening anymore. His brain had already shifted into problem-solving mode. He climbed onto the trailer and opened the rear access compartment beneath the alternator assembly. Behind wiring harnesses and old steel brackets sat something he had nearly removed during restoration. An old manual transfer regulator, primitive, mechanical, ugly but functional. Most people would have replaced it with modern electronics. His father hadn't. Elijah finally understood why. Mechanical regulators reacted slower, but they failed softer. No digital shutdowns, no total system lockouts. If managed carefully, maybe. He jumped back down. We don't split the system. Marcus frowned. What? We rotate it. The maintenance supervisor blinked twice.
Rotate what?
Load priority. Elijah grabbed a grease pencil from his pocket and started writing directly onto the wet trailer rail. Hospital critical systems. 15-minute stabilization intervals. Nursing home oxygen recharge cycles. Marcus stared. You're talking about manual rolling load management? Elijah nodded, in sequence. The maintenance supervisor looked confused. Elijah spoke faster now, focus ice. Most oxygen concentrators don't need continuous maximum draw. If we recharge backup systems in intervals while hospital refrigeration cycles downward. He pointed at the trailer rail. We can stagger demand curves. The paramedic frowned. You can do that? Not electronically. Elijah looked at the old generator, mechanically. Marcus stared at the calculations appearing across the steel rail. Then slowly his expression changed. Because he recognized something deeply uncomfortable. This wasn't improvised guessing, this was engineering. Not formal engineering, not corporate engineering, field engineering. The kind learned by people who couldn't afford mistakes. Elijah looked toward the maintenance supervisor. You got long extension cable? Some. Need all of it. Then toward the paramedic. Your nursing home close? 8 minutes. We'll run mobile recharge rotation. Marcus shook his head immediately. You move this generator and the hospital loses power. We don't move the generator. Elijah pointed toward an old auxiliary distribution panel attached near the trailer base. We move electricity. At 6:34 am, the strangest convoy Jackson County had ever seen rolled out of Mercy County Hospital. 2 ambulances, 1 maintenance truck, 3 county utility vans, and 6 giant industrial extension reels feeding power from a 40-year-old diesel generator sitting in a flooded hospital parking lot. Rain still fell lightly as county deputies blocked intersections for the cables crossing roads. Nobody cared how ridiculous it looked anymore, because by then people understood something. Working mattered more than looking modern. At the nursing home, exhausted staff members cried openly when hallway lights flickered back alive. The oxygen system stabilized room by room. Not perfectly, not elegantly, but enough. One elderly man wrapped in blankets near the entrance grabbed Elijah's sleeve weakly. "You with the power company?" Elijah shook his head. "No, sir." The old man looked toward the ambulances outside. "Then why you helping us?" Elijah hesitated. Because the real answer would have taken too long. Because the real answer involved his father, and debt, and race, and machines people gave up on too early. So instead he simply said, "Because somebody should." The old man squeezed his wrist once, then let go. By 8 a.m. word had spread across the county. People started showing up at Mercy Hospital just to see the old generator running in the rain. Farmers, volunteer firefighters, utility workers, truck drivers. One local deputy brought diesel fuel from his own farm tank. Another man arrived carrying breakfast biscuits wrapped in foil. Nobody organized it. People simply started helping. And for the first time in years, Marcus Whitfield found himself standing in a crowd where nobody cared how expensive his truck was. Because the center of attention wasn't money anymore. It was usefulness. That realization sat badly with him. Not because he was evil. Because he'd spent 20 years believing usefulness and success were the same thing. Now he wasn't so sure. At 8:47 am, the county utility director finally arrived. A short woman named Denise Carter, with mud on her boots and a soaked yellow rain jacket. She stared at the generator setup in silence for nearly 30 seconds, then looked at Elijah. "You built this load rotation yourself?" Elijah nodded. She looked at the trailer rail, covered in grease pencil calculations. Then at the cables running across the flooded parking lot. Then at the hospital lights glowing steadily behind them. Finally she let out one short breath. "Hell of a thing." Marcus immediately stepped forward. "Denise, this entire setup is unstable. Completely outside the C-Street regulation standards." Denise looked at him calmly. "So is dying in the dark." Marcus opened his mouth then stopped. Because he suddenly realized nobody around him agreed with him anymore. Not the nurses. Not the deputies. Not the utility workers. Not even the hospital staff. Something had shifted during the night. Not dramatically, quietly, the way public opinion always shifts. One small realization at a time. Denise walked around the generator slowly, then stopped near the brass plate. "Calvin Brooks." Her face changed slightly. "You knew Calvin?" Elijah looked surprised. "You did?" Denise nodded once. "He fixed backup systems after Hurricane Frederick back in '79. She ran her fingers lightly across the old housing. "People used to call him when nobody else could keep equipment running." Elijah stared at her. His father rarely talked about those years. Denise smiled faintly. County Hospital would have lost half its blood storage back then without him. Marcus looked between them. "You never mentioned any of this," Elijah answered honestly. "Nobody asked." That sentence stayed in Marcus Whitfield's head much longer than he expected. At 16 a.m., the generator stumbled again. Hard this time. The lights dimmed sharply enough for alarms to trigger upstairs. Everybody froze. The engine coughed once, twice. Then, a loud metallic squeal cut through the parking lot. Elijah moved instantly. He reached the side housing before the flywheel fully slowed. His stomach dropped immediately. Oil pressure collapse. Not total failure yet, but close, very close. He opened the side panel and saw fresh oil spraying near the lower seal assembly. One of the rebuilt lines had cracked under continuous vibration. The old engine was bleeding itself dry. The maintenance supervisor looked terrified. "Can you fix it?" Elijah didn't answer immediately. Because this time the truth was ugly. Maybe not. He looked at the spreading oil beneath the trailer. Then at the hospital. Then toward the nursing home power cables disappearing down the flooded road. The old engine rattled violently now. Struggling. Marcus stepped beside him quietly. For the first time all night there was no arrogance left in his voice. Only concern. "What happens if it goes down?" Elijah watched the pressure gauge shaking lower. Then answered softly. "We get about 90 seconds before everything starts shutting off." And inside the hospital behind them. The lights flickered again. The flicker lasted barely 2 seconds. But inside Mercy County Hospital, 2 seconds felt enormous. Monitors beeped, emergency lights dimmed. Somewhere upstairs a nurse shouted for respiratory support. Outside beneath the rain-soaked awning, every eye turned toward the generator. The old Detroit diesel shuddered violently now. Chunk! A metallic squeal screamed from deep inside the housing. Not complete. Silence worse. The sound of a dying engine trying to keep going. Elijah grabbed the side panel before the flywheel fully slowed. Oil sprayed across his sleeve from the fractured pressure line near the lower seal housing. The metal fatigue had finally won. 20 continuous hours under unstable emergency load. No engine that old was designed for that, especially not one rebuilt in a small garage by a man everyone called foolish. The maintenance supervisor looked pale. Tell me you can fix it. Elijah stared at the cracked oil line, then toward the gauges. Oil pressure almost gone. Temperature rising. If the crankshaft seized now, the entire engine could lock permanently. And if that happened, every system inside the hospital would begin collapsing one by one. Ventilation, medication, refrigeration, monitoring systems, the nursing home too. Marcus Whitfield stepped closer beside him. What do you need? Elijah answered immediately. Hydraulic hose. Marcus blinked. What? Half-inch line, high pressure rated. That's not hydraulic equipment, I know. The old diesel coughed again. Elijah pointed toward Whitfield's dealership truck parked near the entrance. You got service inventory in there? Marcus hesitated. Just long enough to reveal something ugly. Instinct, ownership, control. The old reflex that asks, why should I help him? Then another flicker hit the hospital windows. That decided it. Marcus pulled keys from his coat pocket and tossed them toward Elijah. Passenger side storage compartment. Elijah caught them and moved immediately. The rain had almost stopped now, leaving the parking lot wrapped in cold gray dawn light. Muddy water reflected ambulance lights in broken ripples across the pavement. Inside the Whitfield Ag Systems truck sat row after row of factory-sealed hydraulic fittings and industrial hose assemblies. Expensive inventory. The kind Marcus never let mechanics touch without paperwork. Elijah grabbed 3. Then stopped, because sitting beneath the storage rack was something else. A portable industrial load balancer module, brand new, still boxed. Marcus appeared behind him. Elijah looked up sharply. You had this the whole time? Marcus looked uncomfortable for the first time since Elijah had ever known him. It arrived Friday. You said emergency support wasn't available. Marcus rubbed rainwater off the back of his neck. It wasn't configured yet. Elijah stared at him. The truth arrived quietly. Marcus had possessed equipment that could have stabilized the hospital hours earlier. But deploying it required certified technicians from Jackson. And Marcus Whitfield didn't trust anybody except approved systems, approved companies, approved experts, approved people. The realization sat heavily between them. Marcus finally spoke. I thought waiting was safer. Elijah looked toward the hospital. Sometimes waiting is what kills people. Marcus lowered his eyes. No dramatic guilt, no movie-style breakdown. Just a man realizing that being educated and being wise were not always the same thing. Elijah grabbed the load balancer box. Help me carry this. Marcus looked surprised. You still want my help? Elijah slammed the truck compartment shut. You own the equipment, I know how to use it. He looked at Marcus directly. Seems stupid not to combine those things. That sentence changed something, not just in Marcus. In everybody standing nearby. Because dignity sounds different from revenge, and people recognized the difference immediately. 20 minutes later, the parking lot had transformed into a field workshop. Nurses held flashlights. County deputies dragged cable reels. Utility workers assisted with grounding lines. Marcus Whitfield himself knelt in standing water beside Elijah, helping secure stabilizer mounts beneath the trailer. Nobody would have believed that image the day before, especially Marcus. At 9:52 a.m., Elijah spliced the replacement hydraulic line into the oil pressure system using improvised steel clamps and modified compression fittings. Not elegant, not permanent, but enough. Then he integrated the portable load balancer between the hospital switchgear and the aging generator output. The old diesel engine still shook hard beneath load stress, but now the power fluctuation softened. Smoothed, controlled. Marcus stared at the gauges. You built half this system out of spare parts. Elijah tightened the last fitting. No, he glanced toward the hospital. We built it. Marcus looked at him strangely after that, like he was seeing a completely different man from the mechanic he'd dismissed for years. At 10:04 a.m., Elijah restarted the load cycle. The generator coughed once, twice. Then the flywheel caught chunk, chunk. Oil pressure climbed slowly, 40 psi, 50-60. Inside the hospital, hallway lights steadied again. The maintenance supervisor looked at the monitors in disbelief. Stable frequency. One nurse sat down against the wall and started crying from relief. Another crossed herself silently. And upstairs in pediatric intensive care, a little girl named Ava Mitchell finally fell asleep after nearly 18 hours of fear and noise and flickering lights. Her mother would later say the first thing Ava heard before drifting off was the sound of that old engine outside the hospital. Like distant thunder that refused to quit. At 11:37 am, county grid power finally returned, not dramatically, just a low electrical hum moving through the walls. Lights brightened, monitors stabilized, air systems restarted room by room. People looked around cautiously at first, almost afraid to trust it. Then slowly the realization spread. They had made it. The old diesel generator continued running another 3 minutes while Elijah monitored transfer stability manually. Only after he confirmed clean grid synchronization did he finally shut the engine down. The flywheel slowed gradually. Chunk, 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 then silence. Real silence this time, no alarms, no panic. Just exhausted people standing in cold morning air around a machine older than most of them. For several seconds nobody moved. Then the nurses started clapping. Not loudly, not theatrically. Just tired people thanking something that had carried them through the night. Elijah looked uncomfortable immediately. He wiped grease off his hands with the same old red rag and started packing tools back into the trailer, like he wanted the attention to end as quickly as possible. That made the applause feel even more genuine. Marcus Whitfield stood nearby watching him, then finally said quietly, "Your father would have been proud of you." Elijah kept packing tools. "I don't know." Marcus frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Elijah closed the toolbox. "My father used to say people only respect mechanics when something breaks." The sentence hung there softly beneath the gray Mississippi sky, because everybody standing there knew it was true. They respected surgeons every day, lawyers every day, executives every day. But mechanics? Usually only when the lights went out. Marcus looked toward the generator one last time, then toward the brass plate carrying Calvin Brooks' name. "I would have hired him now." Elijah nodded once. "Yeah." A television news van arrived 20 minutes later, then another. County officials started giving statements. Hospital administrators shook hands. People wanted interviews, photos, explanations. But the strangest thing happened. Most of the cameras drifted toward the generator instead of the people. Because the machine itself had become part of the story. An old engine everyone would have ignored 3 days earlier had just carried an entire community through disaster. And somehow people understood that meant something beyond machinery. By early afternoon, Elijah finally climbed into his old flatbed truck. The generator sat chained behind him again, streaked with rainwater and grease and emergency repairs. Marcus walked over before he could leave. "What are you going to do with it?" Elijah looked back at the engine. The faded paint, the welded seams, the brass plate carrying his father's name. Then at the patched oil lines still dripping slightly. "Fix it properly." Marcus nodded slowly, then surprised himself. "If you want." He hesitated awkwardly. "Whitfield Ag has machine shop space, CNC fabrication too." Elijah raised an eyebrow slightly. Marcus gave a tired half-smile. "I know." Hell froze over. For the first time all story Elijah actually laughed. Small, quiet, human. Then he looked toward the hospital one last time. People were alive in there because an old mechanic once rebuilt a forgotten engine carefully enough that decades later it still mattered. That thought settled into him deeper than he expected. Before driving away, Elijah reached into the cab and pulled out his father's old gloves from the dashboard. Still cracked at the fingertips, still smelling faintly of oil and river water. He placed them carefully on top of the generator housing beside Calvin Brooks' brass plate. Not as tribute, as continuation. Then he started the truck. As the flatbed rolled slowly out of Mercy County Hospital, a little boy standing near the entrance pointed toward the trailer and asked his mother, "Why'd everybody think that old thing was junk?" His mother watched the generator disappear down the flooded road, then answered softly, "Because most people don't understand value until they need it." The storm damage took weeks to repair across Jackson County, but people remembered that night for years, not because of politics, not because of the hospital board, not because of the news coverage. They remembered the sound. Chunk, chunk, an old engine breathing life into a dark hospital while rain covered Mississippi. And they remembered the mechanic nobody respected until the lights went out. Years later, Mercy County Hospital installed a permanent plaque near the emergency loading dock, not a large one. Just brushed steel beside the wall. It read, "During the April storm of 1998, emergency power was maintained here by local mechanic Elijah Brooks, and a restored 1964 diesel generator rebuilt by Calvin Brooks. Some things survived because somebody cared enough to repair them. That was all. No dramatic slogan, no corporate branding, just the truth." And maybe that was enough. Disclaimer. This story is fictionalized but grounded in real-world rural American mechanical culture and emergency preparedness realities. Older mechanical diesel systems were often valued for durability, because they could continue operating without modern electronics during floods, storms, or electrical instability. The story is ultimately about respect for skilled labor, repair culture, intergenerational knowledge, and the people whose quiet competence often keeps communities functioning long before anyone notices them.